Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Joel and Adam for another episode of Horror Express. And tonight we're talking about the 1984 film Night of the Comet. This is one that I have not seen in ages. This is my first time going back to it since I was a kid, probably. I think Adam was the same way. I don't know. I can't. Adam, were you similar? And
Yeah, I would even go a step further in that on watching this. It's like I did see this in the 80s, but I kind of realized watching it, I'd only been over like at friends' houses
mm,
and it had been on and we'd been talking. And so I had all these images from the movie in my head, but when the plot was kind of playing out, I'm like, yeah, I don't think I ever actually sat down and watched the thing and paid attention
yeah.
to it. So
Yeah.
it was,
No,
yeah.
I think I was probably similar, or I watched it and I just forgot a lot of the details. Like I
Hmm.
remembered some of the key scenes, like the female scientist with the sunglasses on as she's about to kill herself with the injection of whatever it was, and the monologue that she gives. I remember that monologue very distinctly, but a lot of the other things are just images and flashes. The mom's house in San Diego, I remember because I had a grandma in San Diego, and it reminded
Hmm.
me of the house. Things like that. And Joel, this was your first time seeing it, right?
Yeah, I think so. I may have seen this when I was a kid, like as a sci-fi rerun or something like
Mm.
that, but
So it was
I don't
familiar
remember
when
anything
you were
about it.
when you were watching it, where you're like, "Oh, this
Well,
looks familiar," or
not really. I had that vague feeling of like deja vu sometimes
mm,
when I was watching it, but I don't know if it's because I've seen it before or because it has a lot of DNA with like a
yeah,
lot of movies that do this kind of stuff.
yeah,
Because there's a little bit of like Day of the or yeah, Day of the Dead in there. There's a little bit of a lot of different like
yeah.
zombie movies in there.
And I know Adam
Um,
was for another reason. Adam was talking about 28 Days Later, which
Hmm.
is a whole separate topic. But that movie, I think, the opening scene really reminds me of like the style of how they had dealt with civilization collapsing. Kind of reminded me of how they did it here.
Yep.
But Yeah, so for those who haven't seen it, I'm sure there's probably a lot of people that haven't because I feel like this is a movie that is not as well remembered as many other films from this period. I know it's like a cult classic, but you just don't see people talking about it that much. There's a comet is coming. I guess it was the same comet that possibly was related to the destruction of the dinosaurs. That kind of play a little loose with the facts, but they say that this is like the
Uh-huh.
first time it's been around, and they said like not since the end of the dinosaurs, basically. And there's a hint that some people in the scientific community are going into a bunker because they know this might be a bad thing, but everybody else is partying, kind of like in uh, what was it, Judgment Day, right? The was Judgment Day the no, I'm getting my
No,
movies mixed up.
Independence Day.
Independence Day, thank you. Independence Day. Like Independence Day where people are celebrating and then the aliens invade. And so everybody's celebrating this comet and it leaves a plume of red dust that infects people and turns them into it either disintegrates you or if you were protected, you get infected and you turn into what I would call a competent zombie, a competent and mentally capable zombie that's capable of speech and a number of other things, but still kind of a zombie. Um, and the main character is this girl who works at a movie theater and she's making out with her kind of boyfriend. Like I don't know what he is, but his name is Dupree, and all we know about him is that he sells bootleg copies of the films that they get there, and so he's kind of a scummy guy. But because the projection booth is encased in steel, she's protected. Her sister sleeps in a shed at home and is protected, and then they kind of band together and they have to find their way in this world, and that eventually leads them to this sinister scientific underground bunker at the end of the movie, where they're at first you think it's like a creepy sex thing or something, but then it turns out to be like no, they're using people to draw their blood so that they basically turn you into uh, they basically like make you brain dead and use your blood so they can create a serum to reverse the effects of the comet on themselves. Um, and so I don't know. Did I miss anything crucial in the plots there? There was a guy named Hector that I probably forgot about, but other than
he
that,
just kind of shows up.
yeah,
No, I mean like I think that's the major strokes of it, right? Because there's interpersonal stuff that happens between the characters that's like the actual meat of the movie. But
yeah,
as far as like the beats of the plot, yeah, that's pretty much it.
yeah. And so I don't know. Your reactions to this movie? I guess let's start with Joel because it was his first time seeing it.
Um, I think you and I were talking about how 80s this movie was
Yeah.
earlier. This is an extremely 80s movie. Like they even have a shopping mall like scene after the world ends. Like it can't escape. It can't escape how 80s it is. The hair is very 80s. The younger sister being a cheerleader in an extremely 80s cheerleader outfit is extremely 80s. The whole thing, it's like, oh man. So it's nostalgic even if you didn't really live through a lot of the 80s, because I only saw a little bit of that. I was a baby in the 80s, right?
I was getting painful nostalgia. Well, like it was making. I was getting physical memories from the 80s watching this film. Like because the decor too was so like all the neon, like the way they used neon. It just was. This was like the peak style that kind of lingered up to the end of the 80s, I think, and it just the movie really reminded me of like when I was a kid between like 84 and 1987.
Yeah, so there was that. I like this movie more than I thought I would. Because when it starts, it really feels like one of those Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, like deeply into the B movie territory, B movies. You know,
it literally
And
starts
then,
at a movie theater with like some real corny dialogue and a corny character, right? So,
did we ever get any answer about the guy whose high score she was beating?
yeah, we
Yes.
did at the very end. At the very end, we got an
Okay,
answer.
okay.
His
It's the
license
guy-
plate was DMK.
Yeah, it was kind of
okay.
tagged on at the end in like an odd
That's
way,
right.
but
I
Okay,
didn't even
the
think
question
about
is,
that.
I got the impression he like stole that car. He's like, oh, I got 12 more of them. You know, it was
that's
just something
right.
he scavenged.
But
so-
that was his name though, so that must have been his actual car, right? Or he saw the license plate and said, "Hey, those are my initials," and
This has got to be
Could
my
be.
car.
or he
might be.
assumed that guy's identity.
He assumed it. Yeah,
Here's the
that's
thing.
right.
He already had the vanity plate, which he took off of his car and put on a better car. That's
Yeah.
what he
That's
did.
possible. That's possible.
So that would
Yeah,
have been my
just-
post-apocalypse move.
He assumed his identity because he was jealous of his number 6
So-
score on the game.
But you were saying you
Like,
liked it. You liked it better than you thought you were, even though it started out in B.
Because it's goofy, but it does two things that I think are really impressive. The first thing is that it focuses on the interpersonal relationships of the characters, and it does so in a sophisticated way that's both believable and nuanced. And so the plot's driven by the different characters making decisions. I always love that, and it showed that they actually had a lot of like craft and skill with making this weird, goofy Comet movie. And it actually has a few moments where the characters are overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the end of the world. And it actually there's a lot of it's some dark nihilistic moments where like the younger sister is just like the whole world is gone.
Yeah.
It's freaking gone. And it has some sort of a sappy ending, I guess, a little bit, but I don't know. There's something about it where they never really stop acknowledging just how dark that is.
Yeah, I don't know if that's so much sappy as it is. There's almost something demented about that ending. Do you know what I mean? Like, we'll get into that. We'll get into that later. But yeah, no, I want to agree with you. I think I was really impressed with just how believable their reactions were when they realized that the world had kind of ended. It wasn't like they didn't jump to like, oh my god, and they also didn't like. They didn't ignore it either, but it was kind of more like stages of denial that were in play, and it just kind of and then the emotions would well up, so it just felt more like a plausible reaction. Now, Adam, what was your reaction to the movie?
Well, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it. I mean, same thing. It's definitely a very low budget movie. It's definitely got that feel to it. But yeah, it really kind of pulls you into the characters. They have a lot of depth. I mean, one touch I liked is the fact early on it brings up the fact that their father kind of tried to raise them as boys early on, and they've got this tomboyish element to it. But a lot of movies when they do that will push all the way in that direction. But it's like these are also girls who act like girls too. So it just added a nice complexity to their characters, I think. I mean, not that I dislike the characters in Krampus. You've got those similar characters in Krampus where the girls who are raised as boys and they're just they're
not as likable.
really pushed in that direction, Whereas these just felt more like real people I knew.
And
but
Regina's whole thing with the high score on the video game machine.
I know. It's But yeah, I don't know. It just has a really nice atmosphere to it. We've kind of talked about hangout movies before, and
Yeah.
this kind of is in a lot of ways a very hangout movie. You're kind of watching these people kind of going through this situation and with these realistic reactions, and I don't know. I mean, I remember one reason this movie did kind of stick with me, even though I never really watched it all the way through, is that, in the 80s you had the whole fear of nuclear war
Yeah.
thing, and there was just this kind of thing that would run through a lot of people's heads back then about, whoa, what if I was one of the last people
Yeah.
left, and what would you do? And it was just something people would think about a lot back then. So this movie just on a deep level kind of brought me back to that time. Aside, on top of the excessive 80ness of the movies. I mean, it's as 80s as movies that are trying to parody the 80s are in its 80s-ness, which you don't often see. Usually like, well, no, nothing was really like that. It's like, yeah, this movie is that 80s.
This reminded me of like hanging out with my friends in the 80s. Like I was like, my friend's
Yeah.
room looked like this place or whatever. Just like everything
Mhm.
looked very 80s to me. Yeah, I had not seen this in I think 30 years. I think this was one of those movies they played a lot on HBO because I do remember seeing it
They
a
did.
lot. And I remember like again that the scene with the scientist woman really stuck out. I remember the scene where he's like asking the girl Regina questions when she's in the bunker and he's getting increasingly irritated because he's succumbing to I remember that
Yeah.
scene.
Yeah.
There were just certain scenes that stuck out, but I didn't remember all the things that thread them together. And this was a film that I don't know, for some reason I would always kind of think about those scenes and be like, oh, I really wish I remembered the context better because just something about the movie made an impact on me. And watching it this time around, I was a little bit nervous because like, oh, this is probably going to be one of those movies where I watch it and it's going to suck. Like I remember it being a certain way, it's going to suck. And I was
Mhm.
really exhausted when I sat down to watch it. I was in probably like the worst possible movie watching mood, but we had like
Yeah.
2 hours to go, so I got to watch it regardless. And it just was instantly. I was like on in for the ride with the movie. It pulled me into it, and I don't know. I liked how chill it is. It's not like most zombie movies are so catastrophic. Do you know what I mean? Like the
Mhm.
zombies are everywhere. There's hordes of zombies all over. And I know we can debate whether it's a zombie movie, but there's hordes of zombies everywhere. This was almost more like you said, like a hangout movie. It's a lot of focus on the characters and hanging out with them and the world that they're in, and the threats emerge occasionally in small numbers. It's never like the threat comes and then that's it, like everything goes to hell. It's like no,
Yeah.
a degree of normality resumes after the threat has come. And just to reiterate what both of you guys said, just how 80s this movie is it's we reviewed a lot of 80s movies on here, and obviously even not on here we watch a lot of 80s movies, and this has got to be the most 80s film that we've done. Like it just like everything about it is so pinned to the time. But also I was impressed by, like you said, like the characters. Like the girls are they're raised by their dad to be tougher and to be to know how to use guns and how to fight. And so the first scene where the girl is attacked by the zombie, she instantly goes into defense mode and she kicks the crap out of the zombie and she rides away on the motorcycle. And that to me is, I don't know, that sets the tone for the movie, because now you're like okay, these aren't helpless characters. Do you know what I mean? You feel like you're kind of in competent hands with these characters, and it makes it more believable when they escape at the end. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't feel like
Yeah.
an implausible escape, because they've established these characters know about weapons. They know about, presumably they probably also know about tactics and stuff like that, because their dad was apparently kind of paranoid maybe, and they're kind of like I don't know. I don't want to make a comparison to like Rambo or anything like that, because we don't know much about the character, but they have, they definitely were prepped for a worst case scenario, and it pays dividends.
Yeah, well, the dad, the background we get on him is that isn't he supposed to be in El Salvador or something, or
I
Nicaragua?
think
he's supposed
Nicaragua
to be in,
is what they.
which is another super 80s touchstone there for when there was all this speculation. Will that be the next Vietnam we go into? Will we go into Nicaragua? That was
Well, and also it was just like there was a lot like I mentioned Commando before the podcast, and like there's a lot of like that kind of military action was really prevalent in a lot of these '80s movies where you have people, yeah, I don't know. But again, that's just a background thing. He's not even in the movie. He's just like he's the dad, and the only parental figure we see really is Doris, who's the most hateful stepmom ever. I think we should probably talk about Doris actually, because I think she makes a really strong impression. And I think that scene is kind of it's kind of interesting when because the first person to get killed by the comet it's kind of delicious because I think Doris is the first person who has a negative reaction to the comet dust, and so because they established her as so despicable, it's kind of like
well, I have to say that was one thing that surprised me as the movie went on, that it did have a lot of pathos, because it seemed by doing that early on, it's like, oh, they're kind of doing this so that you don't feel bad about anybody that dies. But it's like, even with the, kind of boyfriendish character in the theater who's kind of a jerk, it's like you still have Regina acting. She's really upset about him dying. It really shakes her. It doesn't try to do the thing of only bad people die. Don't worry about it. Let's get on with the action.
Okay, so I think the reason we see her die first is because everyone wants her to die after she punches the kid in the face.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right. So that is the teaspoon of sugar to make the medicine of the apocalypse go down for the audience.
Yes.
So you're not thinking, oh, woe is the whole world. You're thinking, oh yeah, fuck her.
They needed to have somebody have that reaction that goes from I'm celebrating this comet to oh my god, what's going on, and she was the best character to put that on. Also, she's despicable on multiple levels. She is clearly having an affair with some guy at the party. She's cruel to both children, and then she punches the what was her name, Samantha, in the face, the younger sister. But also that was a good scene for Samantha because it establishes her personality, where she just kind of is like, even after she gets punched, she still has some fight in her. Do you know what I mean? So
man, I think she's my favorite character in this movie. I really got on board with that character really early, and man, I stayed there. I think the whole movie. I think she's the one that I followed the most.
She was definitely, I thought, the best acting in the movie. Like her performances were standing out to me. Like, most of these were, I felt, pretty typical horror movie performances for the most part. Nothing terrible or anything like that. But I remember in her scenes, she seemed to be able to get the subtle transitions of emotion down a little better than some of the other people. And so I don't know. I thought she was a good character. And
they kept doing stuff with her that at first I was like, oh, that's what you're doing, really, movie, typical. And then it would pull the wool out from over my, the scales would fall off. Like, oh no, what, they're doing something really smart here. There's a scene early on when they go to the radio station and she goes in the bathroom and starts getting undressed and gets attacked by something. And I was like, why would you do that, movie? We know this kid's a teenager. We don't want to see her undressed. But then then she wakes up and it's a dream, and you realize that psychologically we are seeing her become more vulnerable in her dream. And so it's actually kind of cerebral. You're like, oh, that's really clever. And then later on, she gets that shot, which you're telegraphed to believe is one of the evil scientists putting her down.
Yeah, that was a good fake out. It was
a great fake out, because I was genuinely like, oh, I can't believe you made me love this character and then killed her. And later on, it's spoilers, but it's sodium pentothal, and she comes back.
Well, I love the whole setup through all those scenes with that doctor leading up to it. She's disagreeing with the other doctors, and you don't understand what she's doing. We're not bringing people. We shouldn't be bringing people back. You think, oh, she doesn't want to rescue people. She wants to keep the shelter to themselves. And no, she doesn't want them harvesting people's blood. And it's like, oh, okay.
Well, let's talk about
really
that.
Clever.
So this is towards the end of the movie. One of there are these doctors, these scientists that live in a bunker, and all we know is their mission is to survival of the human race. And we have in fact, let me get the character names so that we're talking about the right person. So this is Dr. I think it's Audrey White was the name of the character, and we're led to believe that she's she's clearly at odds with the scientists, but they make it look like she might be the bad guy, up to the point where she administers an injection to Samantha, presumably to kill her. But then it's later revealed that she does it to protect her. And the only hint that we have of what's going on is when they bring survivors back to the base, and there are 2 children, and she sees them and she freaks out, but the whole conversation is muted by the sound of the helicopter. So I thought it was very effective the way they handled that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a real bait and switch with our expectations with that base, because it's a dual plot line that they establish early, right after the comet comes by, right? That there are people alive down here, and they're scientists, and they're trying to get survivors, healthy survivors, because they know this thing is killing everyone. And we get a lot of information from that, and we're kind of, as an audience, led to believe, oh, okay, this is going to be the force that swoops in and save them.
Yeah.
But it's completely the opposite.
Yeah.
The one fuddy-duddy scientist is actually the one who's like not turned into a monster yet, and everyone else has been infected by the smart zombie plague, and they're slowly becoming monsters. And so they think, like you said, they're going to harvest people and make them brain dead to produce fresh blood so that they never succumb. And it's like, nope, this was actually the really, really bad guys descending on our otherwise victorious cast.
Yeah, well, I like the whole thing with Samantha having these rashes that she gets all the time when she's stressed out too, and that being an indication, because that led me to think, oh, they're going to do a thing where the doctors think she's sick, but she's not really sick, and of course, but it's really, one of the doctors thinks that, and the woman who gives her the shot uses that to her advantage. She clearly knows that she isn't really sick. She's like, yeah, of course she's sick, so we need to put her down.
Yep, she uses that to do a fake out, kill the evil scientist, who, again, he's one of those guys where when you first see the movie, you're like, oh, this is the nerdy guy who turns out to be actually following the rules, that he's easily overwhelmed. And then the second viewing, you're like, no, he's just a sniveling, awful coward.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the standoff between her and the other scientist in the department store, where or the mall or whatever it was. That I thought that was just the way that he's kind of like these are not people of action. Like they have a security team that goes in with them, but then they're sort of pitted against each other, and you can just see on his face what he's planning to do, and the way that he's going for his gun. I don't know. I just found it very amusing, the whole exchange there. But yeah, so I don't know. One thing I also want to talk about is the comet itself. I've remembered the comet scene being so much more spectacular. And then when I saw it, I was like, wait, what comet? Like, that you almost could miss that a comet flew. Like, they don't actually show a comet go by the Earth, if I remember, right? Like, they don't actually get that scene of the comet flying by the Earth. You just see it from the point of view of being on the Earth, where the sky starts turning purple and you get these storms. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was kind of a weird way to do it, because I feel like now the convention would be, you clearly need to see the comet. Do you know what I mean? But they don't. It's
called Night of the Comet. Yeah. I want to see a comet.
Yeah, it's like one of those idiot producer notes you get. No comet would not bang.
Yeah, for me, what I mainly, as I said, I never really sat down and watched it. So the cleverness of the plot, I don't know that I ever picked up on it. And I think you mentioned that was on cable all the time. I think it's one of those times when you kind of, I'd watched it with my friends. I'd see bits of it on cable, flipping through all the time. And I just had this impression of having seen it, even though I hadn't. And so I just kind of remembered things like, just the scenes with them outside in the sky and the empty city, and then, kind of having their shopping expedition. Yeah. That was mainly the parts of the movie that stuck with me. So I actually didn't really remember much of anything about the scientists, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I remember bits. The thing is, though, I kind of remembered the woman being evil. Do you know what I mean? So, like, clearly I was, either I misremembered or I wasn't paying as much attention when I thought I was. Because, again, this is from a period where movies like this were on HBO constantly, and sometimes you would turn on HBO and you would catch a movie midway through. And so what tended to happen was you would often not watch a movie the normal way you do, where you start at the beginning and go to the end. You'd catch a movie like towards the end, and then you'd go you'd catch more of it another day, and then one day you might catch the beginning of it or something, and you'd have a very disjointed experience of the movie. Do you know what I mean? Because there was no streaming, you know, unless you rented the film, you were sort of subject to the whims of the TV schedule.
Oh man, that reminds me. That's kind of how I first saw the movie Blue Velvet by David Lynch. It was running on Showtime a whole bunch. Showtime loves David Lynch. And I would just I would flip over, and it would be one of the many insane, already disjointed scenes in that movie. And I'd be like, what is this? And yeah, so.
I feel like a lot of people watch movies that way, and that started to shape the kind of movies that were coming. I feel like, for example, What About Bob is like the perfect movie to watch in that structure of, you know what I mean? You can pop in at any time, and it's funny. It doesn't matter if you were there from the very beginning or not. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like a lot of movies like that ended up being shown that way on HBO, where they're like, well, we know people are going to...
There's a lot of Bill Murray movies that do that, because Ghostbusters does that. Groundhog's Day does that. Like, if it's Bill Murray's in it, you could almost set your watch by it being something you can do that too. Caddyshack does that too. That's weird.
Yeah, when you think about like Caddyshack and Ghostbusters, I mean, it's kind of that Second City crew where they were kind of doing improv comedy, sketch comedy for a long time too. So I mean, those movies do have a sketch structure to a lot of the scenes that makes them work in isolation.
Well, and there's almost not a scene you can come into in those movies where you don't want to watch the rest of it. You're like, oh, I remember this scene. This is the scene where the claymation dog eats that guy. You know,
well, I'll give you a perfect example. Like another movie that I know I saw that way, that I've never seen from the very beginning to the end, is Forrest Gump. You know, I know I'm sure I've seen the whole movie, but just in different sections, and I don't quite know how they all fit together. So, you know, but anyways, I'm sure a lot of people saw Night of the Comet in that sort of fashion. So yeah, what about the bad guys in the department store? How did you guys feel about that scene?
Man,
what was that? What is that movie? I can't remember what it was. It's like a John Cusack movie where it's like got the two guys who have the car, and they have like a speaker on top of it, and they keep pulling up next to the protagonist and like doing this wrestler announcement thing where they challenge him to like drag races.
Was that Better Off Dead?
Yeah, I think that was Better Off Dead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was powerfully reminded of that scene. You know, because he has that announcer thing he does, and I was like, oh man, I wonder if this is what inspired them.
Yeah, the guy had a real voice to it. Like that's kind of what sold the group for me, was the guy's delivery in how, you know, obviously he's meant to be kind of like a psycho as a product of being infected by this stuff, but they sort of play camera tricks with you and make him look very not infected, and then by the last scene with him, it's very obvious that he's infected. I feel they were a little dirty there, actually, with the lighting or something, because I was actually looking for clues, and I was like, no, his skin is pink. He's got the sunglasses on, but you can't really, you know.
Yeah, early on, like I said, I was doing the same thing, and I'm like, what are these guys up to? What's their game here? Why are they trying to kill these girls? What is happening? And then you're like, oh, okay, they're monsters. Okay.
But what I liked about it is, again, like, these are not. We're gonna have to debate whether this is a zombie movie in a little bit, but like, these are not normal zombies. These are they have motivation. Like, these were former stock boys who have taken over the store, and now they've got this weird idea about you can't just come into the store and take whatever you want because it's out. You know what I mean? And again, at first you think oh, like, what are they gonna do to them? Like, you think it's going to be something sexual or something like that, and then it's something much more elaborate. That's just whatever's going on with their zombie infested minds. They're, you know, so they start doing like a Russian roulette type game or something. And then what I'm assuming is, because we saw that guy eat Dupree in the alleyway, that they were eventually going to try to eat them or something. I think that's you know, I think that's the main thing that these creatures do, is and how they maybe connect to zombies.
Yeah, well, if you want to start the debate now, I would say more technically I'd classify them as ghouls. It's like they're these kind of semi-dead characters that feed on human flesh, but they've still got a vestige of their personality left, which is more of a ghoul kind of thing.
It's more than a vestige, though. It's like they're on cocaine, and like
Yeah,
certain
that's
parts of their
fair.
personalities are super ramped up and crazy.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do feel like this is like a PCP sort of thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like one of the
Yeah,
or like
Hmm.
in modern day, it would be like a meth head type, you know, sort of plague. Like it, and they all kind of physically they look kind of like, you know, they look like you might like a really exaggerated drug addled person.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
going to the first scene we get with them in the alley when she's leaving the theater, it's like that is a classic. You've run into some person who's totally out of their brain on drugs in a back alley kind
yeah,
of situation. So
which is what
it
she seems
works
to
for
think it
that.
is too. She doesn't, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, if it, having spent years of my life in big cities, it's like encountering someone like that in a back alley is just yeah, it happens.
But yeah,
well,
so I don't know. Joel, do you feel this is a zombie movie? Do you feel this is more like Adam would say a ghoul movie?
okay. I think that really sort of depends on how far you're willing to extend the metaphor of zombies. Like that umbrella is
Hmm.
pretty big, right?
Okay.
Because I mean, like sometimes the zombies are because they're communists, and sometimes the zombies are like a more general like societal collapse thing, or
Hmm.
sometimes the zombies are racism, you know, or just a plague. In this case, if you extend that metaphor and you say the zombies are like a drug epidemic, then what you have are like cocaine zombies, basically. You got meth zombies.
Yeah.
And in that case, you have kind of the classic elements of zombies, but you also have something kind of more sinister that happens beforehand, right? Because the thing about drugs, as far as like a story structure thing, is that it can start with subtle symptoms and then it ramps up and eats like your soul, your personality, and then ultimately it destroys you. That's what this virus does. And
Well,
somewhere along that continuum, you become a full-on like kind of classic Romero eat people zombie. So I think that you can make you can say that this
well,
is a much longer metaphor of zombie.
Well, to
Well,
add it to the front of your metaphor too, it starts with a big party where you're having a great
Yep.
time.
yeah,
So
that's true. That's true.
there
Yeah, see?
It might have been a
you go.
metaphor for the '80s too, you know. But like the the and also that the kid zombie that he meets in the at his mom's house is
Mm.
kind of more like a classic zombie. He's just growling. I don't think he actually says anything.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? But the other ones are holding like full blown conversations. These are, you know,
Yeah, they have
but
plans.
but I still think of this as zombie. Like I get what you're saying, Adam. I think you're right. I think like they're more better classified as a ghoul, but I don't think there's like a genre of film like ghoul movies,
No,
right?
well,
So,
this is definitely inspired by zombie movies. I mean, yeah, if you're looking at influences, yeah, this was influenced by zombie movies, no question.
but but it ends up being I don't know, again because the zombie it's not you don't have the throngs of zombies flooding the streets. You don't. It's not like and the and they just seem like a much more manageable threat overall. And I don't know if that's because the main characters are so competent that they're just you know that we're sort of seeing things from their point of view, or if it's just that no, this is just a more subdued end of the world scenario that's maybe you know not again it's just not as I don't know, like it's maybe more realistic. Like if you have zombies wandering around, they're not like always coming to get you just because you're there. They can get distracted by other things, right? Like I think
Mm.
you know, so I think maybe it's a little bit more like, you know, the chances of running to a zombie is kind of akin to like the chances of running into a bear in the woods. Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of a threat
Hmm.
level. Um,
Well, it is, but the zombies are also considerably more dangerous because of their intelligence.
yeah,
So
yeah,
there's I don't know, I feel like that kind of ultimately evens out the danger level because I mean, in the end, they're fighting a group of extremely well organized government like weapon carrying super zombies kind of. Like they're basically still zombies, but they're intelligent as people and they have a military, you know, and a complex that they've got like elaborate traps in and things like that. So, well, not traps, but I mean like you know, they use the environment to their advantage, like an intelligent hostile force would.
yeah, and it is very unclear like at what point it's not like like in most zombie movies you turn at a certain point and then you're a zombie, right? And in this one the
Hmm.
transition is much more subtle and progressive. It's like, you know,
You might call it insidious, you know?
yeah. Yeah, it's really hard to know where the line is with this one. And I also am under the impression that maybe not everybody ends up the same. Like, because I feel like the woman never really becomes a threat to anybody. She just kills herself before she could become a threat. Even that lead scientist isn't like attacking his fellow scientists like a maniac. He's definitely driven to terrible deeds for his own survival, but he's not he's not going around eating his fellow scientists, and he seems to have a more sense of enlightened self-interest than zombies would typically have in a movie. So I feel like
it's got kind of a Tommyknockers vibe to it, actually.
Oh wow, Tommyknockers reference. Wow.
Well, I mean, like that was the thing in Tommyknockers, right? Where like it was people that were slowly turning into something abominable and inhuman. It's
it's a good reference. I just haven't thought of that book in a very long time. That's all.
Well, I read it and I was kind of disappointed in it. I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's the book. All right.
That was the last Stephen King book I ever read, so make of that what you will. But,
I mean, I could see it. I think the last book I read was The Last of the Dark Tower series, and I was like, I put it down. And I remember, like, right before the last, like, 10 pages of that, he warned you not to read them because I think he knew they were garbage. And then he sort of made fun of you for thinking they were bad. And I'm like, okay, look, dude. I bought 7 of your books, right? And I spent, a decade of my life waiting for these to come out. And I read all of them. And you call me a shithead at the end because you can't think of an ending. Yeah, no, I'm done with you, dude.
Yeah, Tommyknockers, there were things I liked about Tommyknockers, but I was just like, by the end, I was just like, okay, I'd read all of his books up to that point, and I was like, I don't think I have anything more to get out of reading another Stephen King book at this point. So
you say that, I said that too a few times, and then every once in a while, I'll go back to something like he did in one of his, I want to say it was like Night Shift or something. He did a poem called Paranoia, a chant, I think. And it's one of the most incredibly unsettling pieces of writing I've ever read.
I have Night Shift. I'll have to look at that because I love his short stories. Actually, I've probably read some of his short stories since Tommyknockers. So
yeah, he's amazing for short stories.
Yeah.
So,
but
we're going astray.
We're going astray here.
We've got astray a few times, which is fine. It's fine.
But this movie, there's a lot of actual high cerebral moments in this movie that make you contemplate it in ways I was really not anticipating. Like this meditation on the zombie and what it is to be a zombie. How fascinating that it's able to make us ask those questions. Like, where's the line? Do you need throngs of zombies? What about Wesker from Resident Evil? Like, he's a zombie, kind of, isn't he? Like, and he's like a malicious, intelligent zombie. Yeah. Does that count?
Well, and they give you, because they're dealing with something that's completely invented for this movie, they are allowed to make a whole new set of rules, and you have to discover them as you're watching the film. So it's one of the good things about that is it's a total mystery. It's not, it's sort of like a good movie if you haven't seen it, but you've seen a lot of zombie movies, but you want something that's totally fresh for you, where you're not going to necessarily, you want the experience of what it was like the first time you saw a zombie movie and didn't know what the rules were. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's good for that. I don't think that this disease is transmitted through biting or anything like that.
Nope. No, and I mean, and the other thing too is that these zombies are literally rotting anyway. They're all dying, and it's like by the end of the movie, we have that scene with the rain and all the dust getting washed away, and it's like it's over. It's not like it was a permanent problem. You just had to survive that gauntlet of these crazy people that were slowly dying, and then you're fine. You can kind of go on and do your own crazy thing in the aftermath.
We should talk about the end, because here's
I was segueing there. Yes.
Here's my note for that. This is how, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of ambiguity. I said very, very dark, but oddly optimistic at the end, yet dark. So like it's even the optimism is dark, because you kind of have, once you think about it for a moment, you're like, oh. Like there's nobody around except them and this guy in the car. What was it, DMK or whatever his initials were. But also, like, if you think about what the Regina character is like all the way up to the movie, and then you think of how she's acting in that scene, I feel like she's really unhinged by that point. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's like, she's. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I don't know.
You don't think so?
Oh no,
go ahead. Go. Well, I just feel like
fight.
No,
sorry, go ahead.
she's a little unhinged because and it's understandable. Like, it's an understandable reaction. But she goes from being kind of like a normal teenager to suddenly starting a family with these two kids and Hector. And she's fully like in the mom role. Do you know what I mean? And like, it can't have been that long, right? Like, the kids haven't grown. So,
well, the lights are still working.
yeah. So yeah, I don't. The lights in the water seem to be fine throughout the movie. I don't know, but so and also and again, it's totally understandable. She wants to carry these kids and civilization into the future. So she's enforcing all of the rules of civilization, which includes waiting for the lights to cross the street. Which makes zero sense when there's literally nobody on.
But it did. They almost got.
But that was like a joke. That's like the humor of the scene. Like, there's nothing in sight, and then like it was almost like Harold and Kumar when they try to cross the street and they look and there's like nothing for miles, and then the cop car pulls up. It was that level of zaniness, I thought.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, there's two ways to read it. I mean, one, I agree that you have a valid reading there. The other thing I was just wondering, I'm like, well, is this scene just her messing with her little sister? We have to, I mean, that was like another interpretation. I was just that, it's just her kind of goofing around a little bit. But
she's also doting on the kids with the clothes and like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's there was a lot of stuff in there that just made me feel like, which again, I think works. I don't think it's bad. I think it's just an indication that they are the only ones left in this world. And that's like a super depressing and lonely thing, even though it's optimistic because they did survive. Do you know what I mean? Because one thing that you're led to possibly believe is that everybody is going to eventually die of this thing. And by the end of the movie, it's looking like, oh, maybe they're not going to have any problems. Maybe they're going to survive. So, but then it becomes like a Mary Shelley's Last Man type situation. So,
yeah. Well, I don't know. I got the impression that they are going to survive because basically, if you were properly protected, the problem with the people on the base is that they didn't have their base sealed, but.
No, and I agree with you, but I just want to point out they were in a sealed base and Samantha was in a shed. And like I somehow think like the shed is, not, I know that the venting and all that, but like a shed's got
It was a very nice shed. Very nice.
No, I agree with you. I think that they are meant to be safe, but still there's a part of me that's like, you never know. Like that this was an Insidious type of thing. It could just be years instead of days or something.
Yeah, it could be. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It also could be a kind of insanity, just trying to preserve civilization by following every possible rule is not. I mean, that is a trope you see in these kind of stories sometimes. But
and also
the ending. The ending of this movie is the beginning of the Lord of the Flies, so that's kind of weird to think about.
Well, it's also like the ending is also very, like we were saying about the rest of the movie, so 80s, because like this guy pulls up in a sports car and he's the guy from the beginning of the movie that's like beating her high score, who we've been kind of wondering about. And it's like just as you've completely forgotten about him, he jumps back in, and then he's kind of like, "Hey, baby, get in and let's go." And then like Samantha goes off on a date with him, basically. And I think
her options are limited, but
yeah, no, but I mean, it's just kind of an odd tone. You know what I mean? It's just like a very 80s tone of like, party. Yeah, you know what I mean? There's like
It is nuts, like how enthusiastic the end of this movie is and how upbeat all the characters are. On the other hand, there may be a philosophical counterpoint in that. Maybe it's like an absurdism thing, where it's like, well, yeah, sure, the world ended, but we still have sports cars.
That's kind of what I mean by optimistic but dark. Like it's the characters are all exuberant that they survive, but the world is like a shell. Do you know what I mean? Because
okay, but that's the whole point of that philosophy, that absurdism philosophy, is that like at one point everyone has to face the guillotine. You're doomed, Everyone is doomed. That was always the case, though. And this movie just kind of is like, well, yeah, sure, it's sad technically, but I mean, isn't this the world you already live in?
Yeah, no, I
Is.
think you're onto something, because I feel like, number one, that's why this movie resonated with me for so many years. Where I would always think about the scene with the female scientist, and I feel like her story and her monologue kind of encapsulate a lot of what you're talking about. Where it's just that, like, the sense of impending doom in this movie really comes from that character. But there is also this, like, I don't know, this charming lightness to so much of the film too. So it's, you know, it's interesting. I don't know. It definitely it's like, it's depressing, but in like a very realistic way. Do you know what I mean? It's got like, which again, I think kind of goes back to how a lot of the characters' reactions early on in the movie are so believable and stuff. Do you know what I mean? There's a believability to what's going on.
So here's the thing about the characters that are the heroes of this movie. There is a finite level of suffering that they feel. They mourn for the world, and then they move on. And like, there's an almost like storybook kind of vibe to the way that they live their lives. Like, you know, the young sister is penethaled and goes to sleep, but then she wakes up as if from death when she's in Prince Charming's trunk. And he's a cowboy in that scene, because of course he fucking is, you know? And like, the cowboy goes out into the Old West and he beats the bad guys and saves the girl. And they get married at the end. Like, and then she drives off with her dream hunk in a sports car. Like, everything about it is like almost cartoonish. And yet there is something almost mythologically resonant about that.
I was going to say, but mythic. So I think we're on the same page, because like, it is cartoonish, but it's also got myth to it. And like, I think that scene where she dies, and it's a fake death, but like, I think for analytical purposes we can say she died and she resurrected.
We really gotta, because it really feels like a resurrection whenever you watch it. And like, in a lot of ways, this movie is the dark and light parts of American mythology at war with each other. You know, it's the war on drugs and the war on communism and the nuclear Armageddon, fighting against the cowboy and the cheerleader princess and the and all that. And the good guys win. So yeah, of course it's depressing and awful. The real world is, and the real things that inspire these myths are. But you know, there's something redeeming about the mythology of America too. There's something maybe ludicrously optimistic about the way Americans think about the world. But there's a charm in that lets them face all that darkness.
No, I think too it feeds into what I was saying earlier too, about how, you know, around that time period it was something people would think about because of the nuclear threat. What if I was one of the last people left? And I mean, it is a kind of ridiculous thing. It's like, well, there was a map in our classroom that showed what would happen in nuclear war, which is that everyone as close to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base as me would be vaporized. But, you know, you'd still think about it.
So horribly dark. Children, we're at ground zero.
I remember those maps. I remember those maps.
Yeah.
And there was like the slow death zone too. There was like,
it's like, you're lucky, kids. You live in a vaporization zone. Kids over in Kettering, they're gonna spend like 18 hours dying, choking on their own blood with their hair falling out. So be happy you live in Centreville.
So I do want to say this is also probably a perfect COVID viewing movie, since we're on such optimistic topics here. I don't know why, but I feel like it just was like, I've seen a lot of movies like this since COVID hit, because you kind of wanted to see the apocalyptic films in the, you know, when that happened, and this was what I just didn't.
Good year for the apocalypse. So
and this one resonated more with me than most of the other ones, and I think it's because it kind of hits on a lot of the things that kind of keep coming up with COVID and stuff. You know what I mean? Like there's just all these I just to give an example, like I feel like the cruelty of the scientists in this one, it sort of matches some of the stuff that happens with COVID in like hospitals, and how like you can't, like, you know, you're not allowed to visit loved ones if they're in there with COVID. You know, like there's sort of a cruel by necessity type thing going on. Obviously in the movie it's much more cinematic and sinister, but I you know, I was like, oh, this kind of is like making me think of stuff that's going on in an odd way. And so I don't know. Go ahead.
I was going to say, but I mean, another thing too is, I don't, different parts of the world have reacted differently to it, but where I lived back in March, which I lived in the vicinity of New York, everything shut down like
Hmm.
March and April. And you would literally, I would leave the house, I would get in my car and I'd drive around like midday on Tuesday, and there would be no other cars
Yeah.
on the road and no
Oh, it's
people.
scary.
And it was, like I said, it was like, wow, I've always thought about this, but
Yeah.
now this is what it's really like when the
No.
world is
I,
weirdly empty all of a sudden.
I live near Boston. We weren't shut down as much as you guys were, but we were pretty shut down early on like
Hmm.
that. And we're still, it's pretty tight, I would say overall. But the first thing I noticed is we usually have a lot of traffic. No traffic. Traffic was
Yeah.
suddenly not a problem. It was kind of like,
Yeah.
like you're saying, just like it's as you drive around, there wouldn't be anybody out. You just be like, oh, it's just empty. Like I remember one day, I think we drove through Boston one day, and it was basically like a ghost town. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Ugh.
You would see people, but it just was not what Boston normally looked like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. No,
So
it's so yeah, I that is one parallel I would make. Because that, like I said, one of the things that stuck with me through this about this movie was kind of the scenes of them running around in LA and it just
mm.
being empty, and it more like I said, the plot I didn't remember, but that I did. But
Also the red haze I thought really worked for the
it
the movie.
did. It was a really nice low budget way of giving this movie a feel that really worked for it.
Yeah, and I have to say I didn't even notice the low budgetness of the film, with the exception. And this I feel was like the scene that you talked about early on in the movie theater. It was kind of more like they were doing it on purpose. Like they didn't even have to do, like that wasn't a product of the budget, right? That was just
Yeah.
kind of like something that made it look like it was a low budget movie. But the rest of the movie, I didn't have a low budget response to the film. I felt like, it just looked like a normal movie to me. Um, Not because it was doing anything fancy, but because it was just skillfully avoiding, revealing that it didn't have a big budget. I think I don't know what the actual budget for
Yeah.
the movie was, so maybe we'll find out it was billions of dollars or something. But
No, it
uh,
was actually a pretty low budget
uh,
movie because I did look that far into it, but uh,
I do kind of wonder what happened to the owner of the movie theater. I'm assuming he perished with everybody else, but
yeah, yeah, he just suddenly drops out of the movie. That
yeah,
guy looked familiar
he
to me for
did.
some
I can't
reason.
remember what else he was in. What did you guys think of the whole negotiating over like the little antenna things that he was selling for the comic?
Oh man,
Eh,
yeah, that
It was charming.
it, yeah, it felt very believable to me actually. That did seem, yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
know.
this is top of the line. This 950 is top of the line. This is the 750. She's wearing the 750. And it's just, I don't know, just there was something about the speech. Also, given what happened, the guy probably should have gone for the 950 ones, right? Because, you know what?
Yeah,
Yeah,
live fast
yeah.
and die young.
so, so yeah, I don't know. Anything else to add about Night of the Comet before we head out? I feel like we've covered
I
most
didn't
of the.
I didn't realize how much I had to add until I started talking about it. Like I didn't think about the mythological significance of this movie until I really started cracking into it. Like, oh yeah, I guess she does come back from the dead, doesn't she?
Yeah, and you know what's funny about that scene too is that scene was kind of done for the audience. Like obviously that reveal meant nothing to the guard, right? But like the reveal meant so much to the viewer. So I feel like Hector's
Mhm.
whole scene with that guard was really just sort of, for us. That was one scene that kind of stood out for me for that reason because the rest of the scenes didn't feel like they were playing to the audience that much. But that one, I was like, well, that guard, that's meaningless information to this random guard that you've, unless he's got like access to really high level, information from the scientists. And I'm assuming they wouldn't tell him who Samantha was and all this stuff. So
She was just a casualty, basically.
yeah, well, it's
I
just
gotta
like,
tell you though,
hmm,
I sort of want to see David Lynch do a take on this movie now. He probably wouldn't do it, but like I feel like if anyone could, man. So I've already mentioned David Lynch in this conversation, so now I can speculate a little bit. I would love to see this exact script just done in his insane, bizarre pacing. It wouldn't really be that different.
No, and
Odd.
he'd do well with the characters in this movie. He'd do something interesting with them.
Well, yeah, and
So,
David Lynch always does, like, he really likes strong women. Like, that's one of his favorite things to put in a movie, mostly because he's so in love with Laura Dern, and who can blame him?
yeah.
Laura Dern's fantastic.
Well, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. We've seen a slight touch of what he'd do with a zombie film in Twin Peaks: The Return during the.
Oh, don't spoil it! Don't spoil it! I haven't seen it yet. I've been
Oh,
saving myself.
you've
And
been the one
I've never
promoting
seen Twin Peaks.
so I assumed you'd seen it. But
No, I've been promoting Twin Peaks so that I will get to see it. I keep putting it off because I want to watch it with someone
Okay.
else and talk about it. It's one of those things where you want to talk about it, and if you watch it alone, you can't. You guys got to go to your friends and be like, "Coffee and pie and Killer Bob.
I
I'll
know.
catch you in my death bag." Your friends are like, "You've had too much coffee."
Yeah,
So-
but I will stop talking about Twin Peaks: The Return then.
All right. So I don't know. Anything else to add? Or
No,
we-
I think I'm tapped out. We didn't really talk about the guy very much, did we?
Hector was a good character. It's just that there was, I think, so he worked well in the movie. I like the whole thing where like he basically, I think his backstory. He's a truck driver, and he essentially had what sounds
Yep.
like a prostitute in his truck
Yep.
with him, and sleeping with the prostitute is what saved him from the comet because he had to go into the truck. But I liked how honest he was about it when she asked him. Do you know what I mean? I thought that was kind of that was sort of like a point in his favor as a character. He was he had vices, but he was sort of an I don't know. He was very upfront about them from the moment that we knew him.
There was nothing
So-
duplicitous about his
Yeah.
character. He was a straight shooter. He was admirable. I also just kind of like the little subplot he had where he went to try to save his mom and he had to fight the zombie kid. There's something sort of fun about that whole.
Yeah, I like the line. You're lucky I like kids. Something like that. Like he just wouldn't kill this. The whole time I'm just like, just shoot it in the head. It's gonna keep coming. But he
It reminds me
couldn't
of the
do it.
song Leslie and the Lee's Zombie Killer. That's amazing. Which is shoot them in the brains, even the little kids, as part of the chorus of that song.
I think I'm saying that as somebody that's just grown up watching zombie movies my whole life. But Hector is plunged into this world, and that was probably a scene that's meant to indicate that he's his humanity is still intact. And so if he had shot the kid, then you'd be questioning his humanity for the rest of the film.
Yeah, if he had just not even hesitated and just popped that kid.
Well, the thing I thought of, oddly enough, I play Minecraft with my nephews because they're all deep into Minecraft, and in that you have a lot of zombies in that game. There's also the baby zombies, and those are the really fast zombies. They're just like small, and they just barrel at you at high speed. And they're one of the more terrifying monsters in the game. So when he just came through, I'm like, oh, it's a baby zombie, run!
I have thought that Minecraft was Minesweep for the longest time until you.
I spent about a year thinking it was Minesweeper
Yeah.
too. I'm like, why are people so into
Yeah, it's like,
Minesweeper
what?
all of a sudden?
That's because that's what
the
I
heck?
thought it was like a new version of Minesweep, basically. Like oh, it's like 3D or something crazy. And I was like,
Yeah,
they need to
I-
change the
I
name of
think
that
so.
game.
Oh, it's the greatest selling video game of all time. So
okay.
I think they've kind of made people forget about Minesweeper by this
Yeah,
point.
I'm
Now it
probably the
needs to
wrong
change.
person to ask about naming your video game. All right, so why don't we head out, and we'll be back next week. We're going to continue with the zombie theme now. This was sort of our soft entry into zombie month.
Yes.
We already did Night of the Living Dead, so we're probably going to do another Romero during the month, and we have a few other films lined up, and we'll see which ones end up making the final cut. And until
If we weren't old men, we could do a Twitter poll. That would be amazing.
maybe, well, I don't know if I want to be. See, here's the thing. I don't
Don't
want
to go on Twitter.
I know
It's the real life zombie apocalypse.
It's
I
not
never
that.
like putting things up to a popular vote. It's an invitation for disaster. I
Democracy
Well,
is evil.
and
Out
we
of
saw
bars.
that in this movie. The majority clearly was misguided in this film. So, do we want to entrust a majority of people to decide what movie we're going to watch?
I like how immediately we all reject democracy from principle.
We're
So,
like
nope, concentration of power all the way.
we're like Rick in what was it, season 2 of Walking Dead, where he's, this is not a democracy.
To be fair,
It's
the
one of the
zombie
situations
movie-
where they're like, let's pick all the most horrible movies that are just abysmal and painful to watch, and let's make them watch that. That's a strong instinct amongst people, and I
Yeah.
don't trust.
Yeah, I share Adam's suspicion of our audience, and I think they should all stop listening to our program as well. I think they're terrible people. No,
We're all filth. Get
Yeah.
out. See you next week.
no, no, you know what it is. I just don't like. I want to be able to have input in the decision. I feel like if we put it up to a poll, we'll get a result, and then we'll be dreading watching that movie for the whole
I
week.
feel like I'm open to suggestions. I like, people throwing ideas at us. That I am totally fine with. I just don't like having the audience calling the shots entirely on things generally.
And anybody who wants to write hate mail, they can all write it to Joel, and Joel will pass it along to us. Just
The Mushroom Press at gmail.com, folks.
Can you
Send
say
me
that
your
again?
hate
Because
mail.
I think it cut off a little bit.
Yeah, it's the Mushroom Press at gmail.com. Send me your hate mail. All of it.
So, all right. So until next week, we will talk to you later.